getting things ready for this whole webinar series. And sorry we're not there bodily, maybe sometime in the future. So let's do what we can for now, and we'll be in touch regarding future opportunities as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Some insights on reforestation methods. And let's see, Lydia, are you seeing this, your muted feature on my screen, on your screen?
No, all I see is your cursor, okay, and at times
right,
in a red dot. All
right, okay, good. Then I'm where I need to be then. Sorry, I'm going to turn this thing off for a second. Okay, now I think we're all right. All right, so with particular thanks to our former director, Dr. Burns Sweeney, who has been really instrumental in helping generate a lot of insights. Charlie Dowd does a lot of statistical analysis and experiment design help. And then Trista Kalin and Matt have all been helpful. If it happened, Kalin Wiley probably did it. He's one of our staff members who he has the sweat equity in these projects way more than I do. So to give you a sense of where we're headed, I'll talk a little bit about bird nets. We'll go into this stone mulch, this 2A modified stone mulch that we're using as an alternative to herbicide. The use of pre-emergence herbicide inside the tree tubes to minimize invasives. I'll go into some tests of different types of tree shelters, what we're seeing there and what we're frankly not concluding too much about in many regards. How to protect multi-stem shrubs, and then a couple of case studies that I think probably have some relevance to your neck of the woods as well. And Lydia made a very salient point to say that please do be careful to respect potential differences in southern New York, northern New York, never mind into southern Pennsylvania. And I will say conversations with your colleagues are very, very valuable in your context. And if two of you who are both reasonable people are having a discussion, be prepared to pursue it if you disagree about points, because there's probably some underlying truth that's operating that you haven't yet put your finger on, that you can both be right, and those are moments of insight. So on the center hole net method, I mentioned this just briefly this morning. Bird nets keep birds from going down tubes and dying, and in rare cases you get enough birds, the ammonia can actually kill the trees. The hassle with bird nets is they are very often neglected, and if they're neglected, they lead to tangled leaders, as you see on the right. The conventional method of putting them in has been the tassel method. Go back just a second, that's on the right. You can see a tassel sticking up. We've been working on the center hole method. Burns Sweeney tried this initially some years ago, intentionally neglected the nets, left them in place. He found out that between the tassel and center hole, he had about a 75% decrease in tangling of neglected nets using the center hole method. So it gives the tree a fighting chance to get out, as opposed to the tassel method, which usually tangles them up. What we didn't do was to do that at scale across the landscape in that initial study, but in 16 and 17, we looked into about 10,000 tubes for about a year and a half, and I would say we're fairly confident this appears to be safe for use. It appears to be effective at keeping birds out, but letting the trees get out. And if any of you have data contrary, please be in touch. 10,000 tubes in southeastern PA is not the entirety of the landscape we're working in, to be sure. So our earliest tests on vole protection methods reach back to some projects that you're looking at here that started in 2013. It was a comparison of a vole guard, and that little brown tube actually goes inside of a full-size tree shelter. We compared that to the use of coarse stone that is 2 inches on its long dimension with none of the fines, leaves a lot of voids. And then a stone called in Pennsylvania 2A modified, some people call it crusher run. It is crushed up stone which has not been washed. It has all the fines, all the fine particles, all the dust, and it packs tightly together and does not leave voids. So here's a picture of 2A modified stone. You can see all the fines in there up to, and this is not a uniform material depending on what quarry you're getting it from. So there's variability, but that's up to about 1.5 inches maximum, maybe 1 inch in maximum diameter, sometimes 1.5 inches in length. So here are the results from that first 4-year study. The control gave us something in the ballpark of 67% survivorship through 4 years. The Vole guards, those little brown tubes, were actually statistically significantly worse than not including them, which is strange, but that's what we found. The 2-inch stone, the clean stone, was no better or slightly, maybe slight statistical significance than no treatment. The only real hopeful place in that study was the 2A modified showed about 77% survivorship through 4 years with no other treatment. In terms of their growth, there were no statistically significant differences in the growth rates of the trees that survived. So with that encouragement, looking at that 2A modified stone, we went into a second generation of stone trials, and we very categorically wanted to compare it head-to-head with a 36-inch herbicide spot. That first trial was a landowner who didn't want herbicide on their turf, on their ground. So to get a head-to-head test, we started trials in 2018, 36-inch herbicide spot compared to a 20-inch diameter by 2-inch thick 2A modified. That's that's the stone I was showing you. And then because 20-inch diameter times 2 inches thick is about 40 pounds of stone, we wanted to ask the question, can we get away with less stone? So we cut the diameter down to about 12 inches in diameter by that 2 inches thick. And that was our test. I'm going to try to get rid of something here on my screen. Because I'm continue to get a shadow that I don't want to see. Sorry, struggling to get rid of this. Yep, it's not going to let me do it. Okay, so here is a graph of then years 1 and year 2 showing growth of those 3 treatments. And let's just look at the blue bars. 2-year data is more interesting than the 1-year data. But what that is showing is there's a significant difference between the herbicide spot and the 12-inch diameter 2A modified. And it is the 2A modified, the 12-inch diameter 2A modified is not as effective as the 36-inch diameter herbicide spot on growth. It's not a huge difference, and frankly, in our context, I'm prepared to give away that growth difference. So just I'll point that out to you from my context. To slow these trees down because they're often overgrowing is not a bad thing. I do want to point it out because it may in fact matter to some of you. And okay, now my ability to advance this slideshow has gone away. So let me see what I can do here. I may need to restart this. Okay.
Hey Dave, this is Matt. If you clicked on the control boxes, you may need to click back on your slideshow, and then you can do it again with your.
Okay, so let me. Yeah, all I'm getting right now is my highlighter tool seems to be haunting me. I can't get rid of the darn thing. Yeah, I'm not sure what. Any suggestions from the peanut gallery are welcome.
Have you tried the enter or space?
Yeah, nothing is advancing it, and it seems to be this highlight tool seems to be commanding the attention of my machine, so I can't even disable it at this point.
Where did that spotlight
it came
tool
from
come
drawing
from?
tools. Yeah, it's from the I have a drawing tools menu at the top.
Okay.
And it was going to be it's like a laser pointer.
Right.
Okay, now we're making some progress here. Oh, this is on the sharing.
Otherwise, what I have done when I've come across this type of problem is just escape out and, like you said, just start over, but maybe you've tried that already.
So let me end the show. Scroll down. Let's see how we're doing now. Hey, look at that. All right. Thanks, everybody, for your patience. So actually, I missed a slide in that whole rigmarole. So here we are. We're comparing the first pair of bars. And again, let's just look at year 2 data. 36-inch diameter herbicide spot compared to a 20-inch diameter 2A modified stone compared to a 12-inch diameter 2A modified stone mulch treatment. And what this is showing is there was no difference in survivorship through 2 years in that context. That's survivorship. Growth, I commented on earlier, that the 12-inch diameter 2A modified shows a little bit of decrease in growth, and I'm prepared to give that away because some of our trees are just growing too fast for their own good. I don't need to have you digest all the information on this slide, but look at the red highlighted column. This is all the sites where we have data on the use of 2A modified stone mulch as a protection mechanism. And the column next to it is how many years old is that trial. So the Weymouth site is a 4-year trial. Yep.
David, we're not seeing the red highlighted.
Okay.
Oh, there we go. Now we are.
Okay. You see a first line Weymouth. Is that what you're seeing, Lydia?
Correct. Yep. We see the table,
okay.
Research sites with 2 modified stone mulch. Yep.
So, yep. So the point I'd like to make here is the Weymouth site is the first site we did showed 77% survivorship through 4 years with stone mulch. There was no mowing done on that site, and it was a reed canarygrass vegetation. So that's a really challenging site to be relying solely on the stone. And what we're seeing on the other sites is we're getting a much higher survivorship, although the trials, we're only through 2 years of trials. This August will be our 3rd year on Lundale, Stroud Preserve, 12-inch Stroud Preserve, 20-inch Monahan, for example. So, so that is encouraging. We are aware that we're not done with doing these trials. Lydia, are you looking at 2020 Stroud installed 60 acres now?
No.
No? Okay.
So, nope, it's like we're a slide late. Yep, here we go. 60 acres.
Okay.
2A
all right.
modified.
I'm toggling between 2 settings that I wasn't managing properly. Okay, so here we are, 2020. this year, we went out on a limb and installed 60 acres of forested buffers using 2A modified stone mulch. We're optimistic. These sites, most of these 60 acres are reed canary grass. We pre-sprayed all the planting locations with herbicide simply because it's reed canary grass. Most of the tame grass sites that we plant with and use stone mulch on, we're not pre-spraying the spots that we plant the trees. So, and I do have up my sleeve, I've got an adequate budget that if this is not working in this tough reed canary context, I have herbicide resources in my budget that I can go back, but we're optimistic that we can do this and make this happen. So we'll find out. Are you now looking at two photos, Lydia, side by side, two tubes?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Then we're back on track. So cost-wise, this is important stuff here. The cost of stone mulch compared to twice-a-year herbicide spots. On the left side there, that 36-inch diameter herbicide spot, the cost tracking that I've done on our sites, I'm running $7.70 per tree, almost $1 per treatment for that work. It's 8 mobilizations. The chances that gets neglected somewhere in the process between busy landowners, if it's on their responsibility, or Stroud, if it's our responsibility, you know, that's a risk. We know it provides good protection through the 4 years of doing it. We've never monitored tree survivorship in years 5 through 8, for example, after we stop spraying. And it's something that I do want to look at. On the right side, this year when the dust settled, they were putting on 2 shovels full of 2A modified. It turned out to be bigger than the 12 inches I asked for. It's actually 15 inches. That's about $2.80 per tree. It's once and done. There's no follow-up needed in terms of herbicide work. That stone is going to be present in years 5 through 8, barring something like major flooding that's washing it away. And we think it's going to have benefits, you know, beyond year 4 for sure on many sites. So it's about a third the cost and a lot less hassle. We're not so much doing it for that as we are doing it to have an option that doesn't involve the use of glyphosate, with the recent concerns that are coming to light about glyphosate broadly for humans, never mind the workers, never mind pollinators. So here you're looking at 2 shots. One got a pre-treatment of herbicide before the stone mulch went on. The other just got stone mulch over top of the existing short grass that was mowed short before the tree was installed. Let me see if this will come up. Yeah, okay, so here I got a video for you of this very high-tech approach. 2 shovels full of crushed stone. And I've actually asked the guys to stop patting it down because I don't think that has any meaningful benefit. It just takes more time and cost for labor. A good soaking rain will do that same settling in that the patting is doing. So this is not a high-tech approach. It is simply 2 shovels full of crushed stone applied around that tube and on to the next tree.
Hey, David?
Yes.
We had a question about lime benefit of the stone mulch, and I think you just, we just saw that picture that maybe showed the lime benefit to the grass. Was that,
right?
Could you go back to that?
Sure. Yep. Yeah. And Lamont's pointing out, if you look at that left-hand photo, the grass is a little more green, a little more lush right around the stone. That's limestone. We're getting a liming effect that is probably responsible for that bright green ring, no different than liming an ag field or liming your lawn in spring. It's a way of raising pH and making nutrients more available to growing plants. Maybe there's some moisture retention, so it could be, you know, some moisture benefits as well. But I think that's real. I don't think that's imaginary, what you're seeing there. And just be aware, 2A modified stone is a designation of the range of particles in the gravel. It is not a reflection of whether it's limestone, shale, granite, sandstone, or whatever. So you could get 2A modified that is shale, and we've actually done that on a site or two. But in our area, the cheapest 2A modified is limestone. Lamont, anything else there?
No, thanks.
Okay. Oh, all right. So then installation details. So we were doing the site prep to do this stone mulch. We were simply mowing the grass short, pre-stone installation, pre-planting. Or in the case where there was reed canary grass, we were doing herbicide spots just because reed canary is such a robust competitor and we didn't want it coming up inside the tree shelters. Normal planting, and then the stone volumes and weights, these are all inexact, but that the 12-inch diameter that we put on was about 20 pounds of stone. The spring, the work they were doing, those 2 shovels full, was about 27 pounds of stone. So, you know, I said 2 shovels full, they've got big flat shovels, and then there's an extra 7 pounds of stone. 15-inch diameter. And then the other trial we had done was with 20-inch diameter stone, and that was a full 40 pounds. That was about 2/3 of a 5-gallon bucket full of stone, to give you some sense of that. And that'll stretch your arms out carrying those buckets for a day. A couple considerations. I'll put this up here, and I'm not going to comment on every one of them. But as you're thinking about project management, the reason we went to this was to reduce chemical usage. It also is huge help to not have so many mobilizations compared to herbicide. If you got a 2-year grant window, the stone mulch is done during the grant window. If it's 4 years of herbicide and you get a 2-year grant, you know, good luck getting 4 years of treatments in a 2-year window. So one of the drawbacks, we're not sure. We're gonna put some stone mulch out in around tree tubes where we know it's going to flood, based on our knowledge of the stream, and see what happens. I suspect that any kind of velocity is going to minimize the effectiveness of this, but I don't think I think there'll be many contexts where this can work, and there'll probably be a lot of contexts where it can flood, but will not have the velocity to wash the stone away to be a concern. Another challenge we're faced with is we already have one site where the topography is too steep to get a triaxle down close to the site, and we were left with shuttling stone about 200 yards with Bobcat. That's going to raise your cost. So, you know, this may not work in every consideration, but at 1/3 the cost of herbicide work, you've got a cushion to play with on something like, okay, I got poor access. I've got to, you know, shuttle my stone with a loader rather than dumping it right close by to the site. So that's the stone mulch. Moving on then. Sorry, go ahead.
To interrupt you before you get going, so there's a question about vole. I know we touched on that last time, but could you just maybe elaborate on that a little more as compared to a regular weed mat and the habitability of the stone mulch for a mole and vole?
Yeah, and we don't often have issues with moles endangering for reforestation project success. Voles are really the item of concern. I'm not sure I've ever seen a mole on a buffer project that I've been on. Not to say they aren't there, but they're not really the concern. Moles do not tend to chew plants the way that voles do. So the stone mulch, I won't claim to understand exactly the mechanism. My suspicion is meadow voles tend to run immediately above the mineral soil, but under the organic thatch layer. So they've got a canopy of visual cover to keep them safe from predators. And I think what the stone mulch does is it messes up that ability. It creates too much exposure to them. It really reduces the density of any plants that are in that area, and they can't really tunnel through it. Even meadow voles will go a little bit subterranean. Pine voles will do that much more so. But I will be cautious about speculating on mechanism. I know from our data that it is working. I won't pretend to say exactly why it is working. Okay, Pre-emergence herbicide inside of tubes. One of the things that we are finding with tree shelters is they're lovely bird perches, and lovely birds bring bird feces. Bird feces bring seeds of all manner of unwanted food sources, including Oriental bittersweet, mile-a-minute multiflora rose, mulberry, you name it, they eat it, and it winds up down your tube with a fertilizer packet. So we earlier on tested out the use of a product called Snapshot. It's similar to Preen that many people would use in their home landscapes, flower beds, to prevent weed germination. It's a pre-emergence. It keeps seeds from germinating. So it has to be applied before seeds have germinated, or it's utterly ineffective. I figured out a calibration using that lidded container at the bottom to get one shake to get a proper dosage. The first trial we tried differing dosage. That didn't seem to have any real effect. The thing that did emerge was we found out that it only lasted about 3 months, and we had a lot of bittersweet coming up by August. So second thing we tried was adding another active ingredient called Route. And what we then tried was the permutations of, do you use both products? Do you use it one time? Do you use it twice? So the 5 bars you're looking at are control, a one-time Snapshot, a one-time treatment with Snapshot mixed with Route. The 4th bar is a treatment in February and a treatment in May of just Snapshot. And the last bar you're looking at is a treatment in February and a treatment in May of Snapshot plus Route. And the tree growth, all of the bars showed that the tree growth was no statistical significance. There's no toxicity to the trees based on dosage or mixture of products. What you will see at the bottom, the bittersweet line, is, did the bittersweet come through? And the only way we stopped the bittersweet was to do 2 applications in both February and in May, because that bittersweet was germinating over such a lengthy period of time that we needed, full 6 months of seed suppression, of germination suppression. And at that point, it didn't matter whether we used 2 products, Snapshot plus Route, or just a Snapshot. So it was, the duration was critical. Having a second product was not critical. So survivorship, I think this is just within statistical variability. There's no real significant drop off in survivorship that we were able to see. In fact, the last bar where we double dosed it, 2 products 2 times, showed the same survivorship as the control. So 2 applications per year led to no weeds through August. Snapshot alone was sufficient, and this appears to be safe for trees. I will note they do on the label caution you against applying it in proximity to leaf out of trees. Looked at some differing tree shelter types. Tubex Combi Tube, which is a vented product. A different manufacturing company called Plantra. They're very similar configured vented tube, and then a standard Tubex tube, which is not vented. And I will say, this has in some regards been the search for the holy grail of what tube to use, and it's been humbling. And I'll show you the data here in a second. And I will say, just having come back from Sullivan County in the past week, watching shelters that have trees that are just emerging, these must be at least 8 to 10 years old, and they're just now getting their heads up out of the tubes. Chester County, Pennsylvania, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, where we're working, long growing seasons. This birch tree, that's a 2-year-old plant. Let me say it this way: it's a year in the nursery and 2 years in the field is now, a 12-foot high plant. We are seeing such rapid growth on river birches and sycamores that sometimes they are wrecking themselves. And that may not be an issue for you. And this tube stuff may be utterly meaningless in your context. So I'll point that out as a regional difference, as a possible regional difference. But the reason we were looking at these vented tubes was to try to slow down these fast-growing plants. Survivorship and the combi, the planter, and the standards, no difference. Height growth, and if you look at just year 2 data, which is the place we were interested, the vented tubes are not slowing down the trees. They're all the same. Statistically, there's no difference. So we were looking to the vented tubes to slow down these rapidly growing trees that are wrecking themselves. And my suspicion is, if I had to guess, because the trees have emerged by a third of the way through the second growing season, we're not suppressing them because they're already emerged from the tube. Now, in New York, a vented tube may work differently if the tree is inside the tube for multiple growing seasons and maybe on slower growing species. But for what we were looking for, this has sort of been a wild goose chase. And the Plantra company categorically made the statement that they thought their whitish tint product was transmitting better wavelengths of light and more light to the trees than the greenish tinted Tubex products. And through the first growing season, these green bars, the Plantra tube did show statistically greater caliper growth. The x-axis on this is the diameter of the stem. Now, it's only a year-old seedling, but you can measure calipers 6 inches above the ground. That's what our standard was. So it showed it for the first year, but by the second year, if anything, the Plantra looks like it's not got the same girth, but statistically, it's no different than the others. So again, it wasn't no important differences through 2 years. So that being said, that's brutal science in some regards. No statistically significant differences through 2 years in our locations. That does allow the freedom to choose tree tubes based on other considerations: the ease of installation, how well they seed into the soil. Choose a tube that has a burst feature. That's important. I will say that the Plantra tubes don't seem to have the generous flare that a Tubex product does, and we're seeing some scarring at the top of seeing some scarring at the top of Plantra tubes, where the top of the tube is rubbing on the bark. Whether that matters in the long run, I don't know. Pricing is another issue, and amazingly, prices seem to change. Plantra wanted to have a role in the East Coast markets. They cut their price almost in half and are now competitive with Tubex products. And then the last bullet, we're also testing a tube that goes by the name of Shore Green. It looks an awful lot like a combi tube. It is significantly less expensive than a combi tube, and we're testing them head to head. So we'll have data on that in another couple of years. We'll have data for you about that tube. I think that the tube question probably comes down to secondary characteristics. I mean, among those 3 products, Tubex and Plantra, I think the secondary characteristics are probably more important than the growth and survivorship characteristics, which don't seem to differ much. Getting on to this question of protecting multi-stem shrubs. There's been a question about whether you can use 5-foot tubes on multi-stem shrubs like arrowwoods and silky dogwoods, the true multi-stem things, something like a serviceberry, tree-form shrubs, red buds, black haw viburnums. They are essentially miniature trees, and they lend themselves to 5-foot tall tubes, but these multi-stem shrubs are the real issue. And Lydia, you made the sort of happenstance observation through a contractor mix-up. What were your insights in New York about putting multi-stem shrubs into 5-foot tree tubes?
So what we found was that they were alive, first and foremost, which, you know, on a site where we didn't tube any shrubs, the shrubs that were in the 5-foot tubes were the only shrubs that were alive. So that was, you know, kind of a big aha moment, like, oh yeah, the deer are eating all of the shrubs. But then once we took the 5-foot tube off, you know, immediately the shrub basically falls over, which is fine. And honestly, they are still living. They fell over and they have been deer browsed, but I would say that they're at least grounded by roots and have enough root matter there where they are starting to sprout up and are able to withstand some significant deer browse.
Okay. So, you know, some of the best insights come about through unusual details. So thanks for sharing that, Lydia. So what we were looking at was this idea of, can we use short tubes, because there is this perception that shrubs may not be a great fit for 5-foot tubes. Keeping in mind there's two concerns. One is protection from voles, and we get that through clean culture. And clean culture, use of herbicides, means it's really unhandy to spray shrubs that don't have a shelter around them, because it's really hard to keep the spray off of them. So the 2-foot tube is used to keep the spray off of the shrubs to manage vole damage. But then the 2-foot tube does nothing for deer browse, and you can see these lollipops here. So what we were looking at was, could you get your deer protection through something other than the tube? And the answer is yes. We put up a welded wire, 2-inch by 4-inch grid, welded wire fence, 4 feet high. And the deer could basically step over a fence that high, but they psychologically, they don't go into these small enclosed areas, even though they could. So that's the difference between fenced and unfenced for short tubes. So that's one option. But putting welded wire fencing into a floodway, you know, think about what that is going to do during the next flood. So it's a significant drawback. We did want to look at options, putting welded wire onto a landowner's property that may or may not get removed in some appropriate time frame. That's a bit of a peril to mowers and equipment. So we were looking at some plastic fencing, and they work. I will say the light plastic that's referenced there, the third bar, that's sort of a 1-inch grid, very light stuff. And then the 4-foot high heavy plastic, that would be like almost like the plastic fencing you would see at a construction site, very heavy gauge. They worked. They were a mess to keep vertical. The welded wire fence is perky and basically stands itself up. But the plastic worked if you were willing to get back there and make sure that it's continued to be upright. We have worked with cages for deer protection of individual plants rather than a large caging of a cluster of shrubs. So on the right, you see a 2-foot tall shrub with an individual cage on it. That's another method that we've used and seems to produce good results. It's time intensive and expensive. We are looking at the 5-foot tube question based on Lydia's happy accident with the contractor. We're looking at that, and Bern Sweeney, our former director, had tried some 5-foot tubes on multi-stem shrubs earlier, and he didn't have good success. And my suspicion was that was as much due to stake failure and the whole system falling over. So now we're using treated oak stakes. So we shouldn't have stake failure as a common issue. It should give that shrub a chance to grow, produce roots, probably sucker out from under the shelter. And one of my harebrained ideas is I'm going to try putting those 5-foot tubes in tight clusters where maybe the deer browse won't be through time able to get to all sides of all shrubs and create their own little thicket for protection by clustering them together about 30 inches apart. So we'll see. We did some informal trials of stakes, 1/2-inch round fiberglass, untreated and white oak / chestnut oak, because those two get sold together very often. And chestnut oak is almost as good as white oak in terms of rot resistance. pressure treated mixed oak, and that's no more expensive than untreated white oak. It uses red oak, mostly it's red oak, and that's more available and cheaper. So they can put the pressure treatment on for no increase in cost. We're feeling good about that. We did try some 3/4 inch PVC pipe. This was not rigid science. This was put it on the landscape and see what happens. I don't think we walked away with profound insights out of that experience, other than to say, it seems to us that the pressure treated mixed oak stakes seem to be a reasonable way to go. The fiberglass will have to be removed. That would otherwise get incorporated into the tree, and we're not sure what the effect of that is in the long term. A publication that is now out, Vern Sweeney did several years of research on, can you establish riparian forest buffers on legacy sediments? And legacy sediments are these deposits that of sediment above the original floodplain profile, often behind mill dams, but not necessarily. Sometimes just change in slope. You can have erosion off of steep uplands. When they hit the flat valley bottom, they settle out and end up depositing there. And there's been voices in Pennsylvania saying that you cannot successfully grow trees on legacy sediments. And it's probably some self-serving commercialism, because some of these same voices are consultants who will design legacy sediment removal projects for you, and they have an apparent conflict of interest, in my opinion. So Vern's formal study says, yes, you in fact can grow trees just fine on legacy sediments. Dozens of non-study sites say the same thing. And physiologically, think about deep, rich soils are aids, not barriers to reforestation. Where there's legacy sediment remediation, where the 2 or 3 feet of soils are taken out of those legacy sediment sites, the water, the hydrology of the site is going to be much more pronounced. The water table will be much closer to the surface. That's going to be a significant challenge to reforestation. You'll just have to choose your species well, but I think it's disingenuous to say that legacy sediments are a barrier to reforestation. And now Vern's paper has categorically done that in the literature. Here is a challenging site. We had about 3 acres of head-high multiflora rose. Quite the lovely enterprise to take on. And my contractor said, David, I think we've got the answer. It's a forestry mower, and he tilted the deck upright, vertical, and drove that thing into that rose thicket. Not OSHA recommended, but highly effective. So we cleared the site of the rose. We did a standard planting. We let the rose grow back, because all we'd done is sheared the tops off. All the roots were still alive, and 5 billion propagules of seed still in the soil. We let all the rose grow back from the roots. Now in middle of June, late June, we went in with a bulk tank and a hose and wand, and we sprayed every square foot of that site that has been planted in trees with shelters on. We now herbicided the entire site, and now the rose roots were dead, and all we're left with is 5 billion propagules from seed. So we put on a heavy pasture mix, we lined it and fertilized it, and here's what that site looked like the following summer. So it went from the left-hand side to the right-hand side. That was not inexpensive. It was probably better part of $2,000 an acre for the mowing, and I'm not recalling off the top of my head what the seeding was for the pasture grass mix, but not exorbitant for that part. But it's doable. So if you're faced with rows, you can do it. You just got to keep after it. And we're simply doing our normal maintenance on that site through the present. Reed canary grass is a real challenge. We are on one of our sites, and this is not a particularly wet site with reed canary grass, but it's reed canary grass. We use our standard approach, 5-foot tube, twice a year herbicide, 2 to 3 times mowing. And those are 2-year-old trees after 2 growing seasons, and they're doing just fine. So I think we can have success in reed canary, but it's just going to require not dropping our guard and neglecting maintenance. I think that's a recipe for disaster. And then you've seen the slide before if you were here this morning, but just pointing out there on the 2 right-hand bars, reed canary is a challenging site. In that last bar, the 3rd bar of the 86%, that's a really wet site. I mean, that's a site that you can't run a wheeled machine through there. That's got to be mowed with a track machine. And, you know, mowing that 3 times a year, we're doing just fine on survivorship. So I think I'm probably over time, and I'll leave it to Lydia for managing from here for any questions, et cetera.
Thanks. Yeah, we have some just additional questions about shrub tubes. You know, a lot of folks have been trying the 5-foot tubes, you know, probably because they're most widely available and we have them. But about the 2-foot tubes, when would we remove them? And like at the point of removal, obviously they should be multi-stemmed, but what impacts do the deer have on them at that point? Can they just like straight up kill them, or, you know, any insights on tube removal with a 2-foot tube?
Yeah, and I don't have any based in science. You know, the trials that we put out with the fence and the 2-foot tubes, those tubes are still on. We've simply left them on in part to see what is going to happen. And you know, I suppose that they may in fact split if the stems are developing enough volume in there. I suppose they are likely to sucker out. The plants are likely to sucker out from underneath. And I think we're looking at those 2-foot tubes as sort of a refugium where the plants can have some protection and in time spread from that point. So I can't offer any answer based in science there.
Okay. Yes, it's been, you know, kind of my experience that they won't split that 2-foot tube just because, you know, they'll go to the top of it and that's when they really start to leaf out. I don't find a lot of leaves in the tube. It's just the multiple branches and then they leaf out at the top has been what I have seen so far with that.
Okay.
Another question we have is about reed canary grass. Do we need to use herbicides or do you have other management strategies for reed canary grass?
So I think mowing, and Lamont mentioned this in this morning's session, you know, mowing is going to be a huge ally in a context with a lot of grass competition, reed canary grass being just a tougher species of grass competition. So frequent mowing, I think, is going to be really important. We are, you know, doing stone mulch trials in a site with reed canary grass, and I'll have more to say about that in another year or two. But my suspicion is that if you're not going to do the herbicide treatments, even with the herbicide treatments, I think to be mowing that reed canary, because it's, you know, it's 5 feet tall. If you mow a 5-foot diameter spot, that reed canary grass can lodge completely across that herbicide spot from either side and both sides. So I think mowing is going to be a really critical companion, and some of the reed canary sites have strong enough hydrology that a wheeled machine might not even be an option. You know, so thinking through how to get that site mowed would seem to be pretty important.
Lamont here. Yeah, one other thought on the reed canary, and then I want to talk about this picture I just posted. Apparently, reed canary grass needs a lot of nitrogen for robust growth, and it's been recommended to us that mowing combined with removing that grass after it's mowed, removing what has been mowed to begin to starve the plant can actually over time reduce its robust growth. We haven't tried that. if anyone else on this call has, it'd be interesting to hear you, but just one other thought. But yes, we're trying to also identify some mowing equipment that can actually deal with the wetter conditions successfully. Hopefully we'll let you know that if we find them. I wanted to talk about this picture here because a number of you have asked about what to do with these taller shelters and multi-stem shrubs. That's an arrowwood viburnum there, obviously looking very healthy, and including some multi-stem growth inside the tube. Once I cut this thing open, it did want to flop over, so I tied it up to that stake just to keep it upright, both to keep that top growth above the deer browse and also allow the shrub to start spreading out. So who knows? This obviously would take some extra work at each of the shrubs, but apparently there's no getting around. We're going to have to do something different and extra with these shrubs beyond our standard tree maintenance protocol. Thanks.
Thank you. Any additional questions before we close out this? It was a really great conversation about the shrub tubes. I really appreciate it. We not only use the shrub tubes for deer browse, but because, we aren't applying that herbicide and we have an issue with death by lodging, the adjacent plant material falling down and smothering out the shrub. At least if the tube is there, we have a fighting chance at keeping that alive for a while. That was my initial motivation. I didn't know if we'd ever get around the deer browse issue. But, okay, I guess that about wraps this up. Any last comments, David or Lamont?
No, I apologize for running long. I was between technology issues and just having more ideas to share. I apparently have gone over significantly. I apologize.
That's fine. I didn't let you know because I thought everything was going very well and it was all really great information that I'm sure everyone appreciated. So, okay, thanks everybody. I hope you all can join us tomorrow at 10 o'clock for Stewardship Insights with Lamont. He has a really great presentation and we're all, at least in the USC, kind of in the midst of our stewardship program. So it'll be great information to apply to next year. Thanks everyone.
Great. Thank you, Lydia.
Bye.